If you want a snapshot of the kind of surreality that dominates right-wing thinking, the renewed national anxiety over the state of our healthcare system is the perfect vantage point from which to see it. Against the shrieks of socialism and the dishonest rabble-rousing over death panels, the Affordable Care Act, aka Obamacare, was passed in 2008 and phased in over a period of years. It was not the progressive vision of a single-payer system, not unlike what most of the industrialized world enjoys, including England, France, Germany, Canada, etc. The right saw it as a big government takeover, even though it was a concept that had its origins in the Nixon administration and later the Heritage Foundation, and was a cause célèbre Tea Partiers and fanatics used to ride a populist wave in the 2010 midterm elections. It was a law that pleased almost no one, politically speaking, in the end. But that's not to say no one was pleased. If you were one of the millions and millions of Americans whose basic safety and financial security was for decades imperiled by a pseudo-capitalistic healthcare insurance system, the law was a step in the right direction. People often forget the healthcare world that preceded this one. Forget government death panels. You wouldn't have the luxury of a panel at all if you overran your coverage before the ACA, or if your insurance company discovered you had failed to disclose a pre-existing condition. For many, health insurance itself was unaffordable under the best of conditions. When a single night in the emergency room could wipe out your savings, anyone dumb or unlucky enough to find herself without health insurance, or to have it stripped when the insurance company contrived a way to cancel your coverage, was risking financial ruin for the crime of discovering an illness. Republicans vowed from the beginning that they would repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. Their surrogates and politicians in the media and on Capitol Hill have been parroting the line so often and for so long it could work as a fast food jingle. The only problem is, we've had a game of show and tell going on for a decade now. The Republicans are telling you everything about a replacement, but showing you nothing. For years, they got away with this mantra because, frankly, nobody in the establishment took them seriously. Even President Obama's eyes glaze over comically when he's asked to ponder the political ramifications of stripping health care from millions of citizens who had only too recently found that the foundational pillars of the law, ending lifetime caps on coverage, scrapping pre-existing conditions, requiring employers to insure more part-time workers, and expanding Medicaid, were more than thanks Obama conveniences. They saved people's fucking lives. One of the most frustrating, I'd even say enraging, parts of Hillary Clinton's arrogant and failed cabal-turned-campaign for president was her reluctance to brand Republicans the way Republicans brand Democrats. She wouldn't have had to lie like they did when they labeled the ACA a socialist healthcare plan, a plan that not only kept private insurance companies completely intact, but mandated employers and individuals within certain income brackets sign up for private coverage. Instead of going on offense, Clinton opted for the cooler heads prevail / I want to be the president for everyone approach. The rest is history. Our purpose here is not to rehash yesterday's news or sing the laments of our fathers, but if you consider our current national outrage at the idea of repealing the Affordable Care Act without a replacement, you're suddenly met with something so stupidly obvious I can't even believe I have to point it out, because it should be tattooed on every Republican's forehead until the end of time. Of these United States, 32 of them have either expanded Medicaid coverage in accordance with the law or negotiated an alternative plan that amounted to expanded coverage. Iowa, with our sinkhole for cash private corporate plan, opted for the latter strategy and is now facing a shortfall of over $30 million. 17 states, and pay attention now, decided to not expand Medicaid at all. This is a program that directly benefits the poorest and most vulnerable members of our society, or rather does not benefit them, because if you live in the familiar Republican haunts, the Old South, Texas, or the sparsely populated, religion-dominated Bible Belt, you did not experience the expansion of coverage. In those states, the Republican Party apparatus deliberately blocked an expansion of health care for the poor after waging a crusade against any reforms of any kind to begin with. Republicans did that. Not Democrats. Not independents, not Gary Johnson in Aleppo, Republicans. They have been rabidly opposed to all proposed health care reforms and are now vowing to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act with a yet unseen replacement. In recent weeks, they swarmed to ready the process of repealing without a replacement in the middle of the night. Boss Trump, per his usual, has been everywhere and nowhere on the subject, aside from reminding the public at every rally and public appearance that
Obamacare is a disaster.
Trump has put forward no specific plan, or general plan, or really any plan at all. My fellow Americans, we may indeed find Congress willing to come to its senses and pass a patch or two for the ACA, call it a repeal, and then promptly call it a day. They may even wander toward a single-payer system, which from what we can glean from Trump's non-specific and rambling public statements appears to be his preference. But we would be fools to think that the Republican Party, the same party that blocked a Medicaid expansion from reaching millions of poor, struggling, and often desperate people, is going to turn around and as a matter of conscience restrain its radical wing from repealing until a replacement plan has had a full public hearing. Because this is about people's lives. Yeah, I'm talking to you, Donald Trump, and I'm talking to you, Paul Ryan, Mr. #BetterWay, Mr. Unified Republican Government. From where I'm sitting, you've offered nothing but disunity on the subject of health care. Trump says everyone will be covered and someone else rushes to walk it back. Paul Ryan says there will be a replacement plan simultaneous to the repeal, but so far he and his Republican pals are showing up like they're your best friend, grinning with their dicks in hand and nothing else. Well, sorry. I didn't buy Trump's Fantasia bullshit during the campaign, and I'm not buying your reassurances now. The Republican Party blocked access to health care for poor people in their own states and drug a health care law people suddenly realize they love through the mud year after year, election after election, with no effort whatsoever to fix any part of the law that is broken. Well, guess what? It's not the election anymore. Nobody cares about your politics. If you fuck this up, usher us backward to the era of pre-existing conditions and predatory insurance, people are going to go broke, they're going to continue to get sick, and some of them are going to die. And it will be your fault. Luane and I are not strict partisans. I wouldn't pull a hair to give a Democrat credit if Trump, McConnell, and Ryan managed to ram through a single-payer system. But I'm not counting on it, and I'm not trusting them while we wait. Show us the plan, the final plan, the unified Republican plan, and if it passes muster, I'll support it. I'll call my congressmen and senators and tell them to support it. I'll come back on this broadcast and sing the law's praises. Fuck, I'll probably get a little bit misty-eyed while we talk about how wrong we were, how much better Trump's plan is, and how much better off we all are now that he rammed it through. Find a conservative who will tell you that. But as free thinkers and fans of the immortal children's television series Avatar: The Last Airbender, we have to accept that hope is an illusion. Republicans have given us no reason to trust and every reason to verify constantly. As a party, they have shown no interest in governance or the welfare of their people for the past 8 years, only obstruction, manipulation, and the politics of race-baiting and anti-intellectualism. As Obama reminded the nation in light of Trump's victory, to govern is to choose. So here's your choice, Joe Blow Republican. Here's your choice, Trump voter. Either step up to the plate with your plan, the one unified plan we've been promised, or step the fuck aside.
The sleep of reason brings forth monsters.
I'm a whiner, and I keep whining and whining until I win.
Maybe somebody will rise up.
We must not confuse dissent with disloyalty.
Welcome to Swing State, an aggressive, progressive, critical, and political podcast from the middle of the Midwest. I'm Dwayne.
I'm AJ. This is episode 5.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Swing State. If you're hearing this the day it's released, Donald Trump is about 1 day away from being sworn in as president, with the lowest presidential approval ratings in recent memory. According to a Washington Post ABC News poll, in answer to the question, do you have a favorable or unfavorable impression of, Donald Trump got 40% favorable, 54% unfavorable. Now, to compare that to the worst one up to that point, that's Ronald Reagan at 58% favorable, 18% unfavorable. So Ronald Reagan, who was, until Donald Trump, the president with the lowest favorability rating going into the inauguration, is still nearly 20% higher than Donald Trump. To compare that to presidents we might actually care about, Barack Obama had a 79% favorable rating going into the inauguration. Bill Clinton, 68%. Jimmy Carter, 78%. That is above every one of the Republicans, including Donald Trump, in recent memory.
So if you're a progressive, the message that you need to come away with this from is that Donald Trump is historically unpopular. There is really no other way of saying it. He is a almost universally reviled figure before he's even set foot into office. And of course, you know, these polls come out, and like I predicted a week or two ago, he is already seizing on them instantaneously, and he did so this time with a tweet where he said, "The same people who did the phony election polls and were so wrong are now doing approval rating polls. They are rigged just like before." Well, the polls weren't rigged before, Donald. The poll could be incorrect and not rigged. I don't think that he understands the distinction between those two things. The polling that was done during the election was scientific polling, and it was done by reputable institutions. Now, the fact that it didn't happen to bear out the results that it predicted due to excessively low voter turnout, I mean, that's just something that the poll can't really account for in advance. Their models don't account for those kinds of swings, and they really can't get down to that micro-targeting level. I mean, remember, he won a few states and a few of these counties by, 1,000 votes. It wasn't even that large of a margin. Like we said, Donald Trump he has learned of these numbers, and he is not happy with them. But it is our job as progressives, as the resistance to this incoming regime, to remind him and his followers at all times that not only is he unpopular, his policy proposals are unpopular. Which is why we were talking about healthcare a little bit today, and we'll get back into a bit later. It's that despite appearances, despite what the government looks like in terms of the overall Republican-Democrat makeup, Donald Trump does not have a mandate to govern. He does not have a mandate to implement his policies. Currently, Barack Obama is far more popular leaving office than Trump is entering it. So remember that every time you hear Donald Trump say something about what he has to do or what the American people want. What the American people clearly don't want is Donald Trump.
From our discussions before about the election and the difference between the popular vote and the electoral college, if you go with the popular vote, he lost significantly.
He lost decisively.
And it's clear that in that respect, less than half of the U.S. voting population actually voted for him. But the numbers of his favorability are even worse than that now. Again, 40%. That is half of what Barack Obama had going into office. And again, almost 20% lower than Ronaldus Magnus himself, the god of the Republican Party. And not only is it a matter of unfavorability, The Hill has indicated there have been 3 times as many bus parking permits requested for the Women's March in Washington, D.C. on Saturday than for minority president-elect inauguration the day before. What that means is all of the city's 1,200 available charter bus parking spaces at RFK Stadium have been filled for the Women's March, scheduled for January 21st. There are more people interested in protesting this president than bothering to show up for his inauguration. One man on Trump's favorite medium for communication, Twitter, Chase Mitchell, at Chase Mitt on Twitter, summed it up, I think, fairly well by saying, "The guy who ran for president on his ability to make and close deals could not successfully book a Bruce Springsteen cover band."
But it looks like he may get 3 doors down, so that maybe that'll put a little salve on the wound. I have a pretty high threshold for surprise and shock. But when you just kind of look at this overall picture of Donald Trump, the beginning of his presidency as he's coming into office, just look at this shit, people. The guy can't get anybody real to come perform at his inauguration. He's already historically unpopular in the polls before he's even done anything. He's constantly on Twitter bitching and complaining. That seems to be his only real venue of communication, because anytime he's in front of reporters, like he was at that freak show press conference last week, he just can't hold up. Because he doesn't know anything. It's like Luane has been saying for weeks now. The guy just is simply clueless. So when you put him in front of other professionals who are asking him detailed questions, not so much his thing. When you put him on Twitter, where he can just lie with nobody to check him on it, then he does fine. As progressives and the resistance movement to this administration and many of its ambitions, which are just noxious, we need to constantly remind everyone of this. And you need to take it into your own heart. This guy has no mandate. He is not popular. He is not loved by the masses. He's not even loved by his own party. And what policies he has, those aren't popular either. So there's not really much of a reason to be afraid of this guy as of this moment, because he doesn't have mass support, and it doesn't look like he's likely to gain it with anything that he's doing, because in his spare time,
he's picking fights with civil rights icons and claiming that they're all talk and no action. In fact, let's be specific. He's criticizing John Lewis, all talk, the guy who was beaten nearly to death more than once in the defense of civil rights is all talk. And yet the minority president-elect does all of his work on Twitter.
It's just amazing to see this, that this guy It's a week before he's going to be inaugurated as President of the United States. It comes to a holiday that is very, very special for many people in this country. It's Martin Luther King Day. It's one of the few modern figures that has his own holiday. That's how important he is to the country. And Donald Trump, who can't be bothered to ever talk about policy, who's only done 2 press conferences in the last 6 months, this guy can sit on his ass and tweet out how this guy is nothing, how this guy doesn't have it, this guy is all talk. That's what he chooses to do the week before he's inaugurated? When people are freaking out about health care, when people are freaking out about his presidency in general, he decides to attack a civil rights icon. Guys, this is all just backdrop. It's hard for me to just sit here and sum it up for you how crazy all this is, because it's hard to take it all together. There's so much bullshit and insanity coming out of this guy and his camp and his propagandists that it's just hard to even take it all in at once. It's so nauseating.
Here's the thing about this that sort of stuns me. Whenever Trump begins rambling again on Twitter or doing things like criticizing John Lewis, we mentioned several previous presidents and their favorability. Look at any of those presidents, any of them, and tell me that even Ronald Reagan would have taken a shot at Lewis right before MLK Day. He didn't even like the holiday, but he wouldn't have done that. He knows better. I'm not saying he wouldn't have wanted to. I can't speak to whether he would have wanted to or not. But even Reagan would have known better than to do that. He would know there's no political capital in doing that. W, who is probably second to Trump in being the most incurious president ever, would have known better. Or somebody running him would have known better. Somebody would have muzzled him before he said something that stupid, if that was something he even wanted to say.
The thing that I keep coming back to, and I'm not the first person to say this, and I'm not the only person to believe it, but guys, it's pretty clear that Donald Trump is not all right upstairs in the head. He's not a well person. He's not, and I say that even with a modicum of sympathy in there, because I'm not even sure if he's aware exactly of what he's doing half the time, and that in itself is a part of the problem. That's one of the symptoms of his whatever it is. I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to diagnose the guy. But it's pretty clear that if somebody is spending all of his time tweeting, he seems to have no concept of how serious the job that he's taking on is, and he's so obsessed with writing every perceived slight on his Twitter account or in front of the media when he gets a chance to step in front of the media or when he deigns to have a press conference, he stuffs that press conference with his own staffers to cheer and clap when he says something, to have his lawyer come out and read a prepared statement, to have Mike Pence introduce him like it's a fucking rally, and then he corrects the media for a list of perceived slights that weren't really even slights, when he himself is issuing them against completely undeserving people all the time. This is just, it's not normal. It's not right. It's not healthy. And if it continues, I don't even know why I would say if it continues. And when it continues, there may come a time where it's not just a matter if he's insulted somebody. This guy could get us involved in some pretty serious shit when he says the wrong thing as president.
Well, it's one thing to take shots at Alec Baldwin and Saturday Night Live. Okay, whatever. That's nothing new. They've had to deal with that pretty much since the inception of the show. But what happens when he's saying stupid shit like that about, I don't know, somebody with nuclear power, like North Korea? And it's not just our enemies. He took a swipe at the EU as a vehicle for Germany. Germany, one of our strongest allies post-World War II. This guy is in charge of nuclear power and one of the mightiest militaries on the planet. Tell me that this is in any way a good choice. Look, Trump voters, I get you were pissed off, and he said all the right shit. But how do you look at this man since the day he was elected, leading up to his inauguration, and the way he's behaved, and not feel buyer's remorse at a scale that is unprecedented?
Because the story we were told, if you'll recall, was that Donald Trump was just doing this for the election, right? This is just kind of his thing. It's his shtick to get elected. But then when he actually assumes office, you'll find out that he has this other side to his personality that's the razor sharp, calculating, smart, tough, successful guy who's just sort of pretending to be an attention-seeking whore. Well, it turns out, no, he's just the attention-seeking whore. There is no other side. And this is what we on the left have been telling you for the last year. There is no other Donald Trump. There is nothing that's going to emerge on January 20th, January 21st, or fucking next year that is going to alter the basic set of characteristics that Donald Trump has and is basically showcasing for the entire country from his fucking Twitter account. And when you mix his incuriosity with his penchant for lashing out against people who actually matter, including our allies, including enemies in the world, including people with serious fucking weaponry. It's not a safe thing to do. And he doesn't seem to know, and he doesn't seem to care, and he doesn't seem to want to know or care.
And I think part of that just comes down to the way he's always run business. He makes a proclamation, and it's somebody else's problem to figure it out. Problem is, he's supposed to be the one figuring it out now. You don't get to just pass it off. And frankly, if that's the way it's going to be, this is not ideal. But if he wants to be just a figurehead and let Mike Pence run things, fine. Just sit down, shut up, be happy that you get to sit in the big chair and let Mike Pence run things. Not ideal, because Pence is still a dick too. Let me be clear about that. I don't think Pence is a great person either. But he's a lot less likely to get us into a fucking nuclear war over tweets.
How stupid are the people of the country to believe this crap?
All right, so we know that with the inauguration of Donald Trump impending and, the disastrous era we're going to be embarking on, there's a lot of shit that's getting swept under the rug or frankly ignored or just absorbed into other news. Recently, there was an event in the news that quickly blew up and then sort of submerged almost as quickly because the claims are quote-unquote unverified, but we'll get into what that exactly means. But what, of course, I'm talking about is the dossier that was put together by a British MI6 agent on Donald Trump. This man, his name is Christopher Steele. Originally, he was doing opposition research during the election, but what he found was so distressing to him personally that he felt the need to share it with American intelligence agencies. And eventually, when John McCain got a hold of this information, he felt the need to share it with none other than James Comey of the Federal Bureau of Investigation himself in a private meeting. As seriously as John McCain took it, subsequently, the intelligence agencies, the heads of all of them, got together and briefed not only Donald Trump, but also President Obama about the claims of a 30-page dossier that was put together by this former British MI6 agent. And it contains, well, there's really no other way to say it, it contains allegations of treason, collusion with foreign governments, and some other kinky shit that, honestly, that's the stuff that got the headlines, but that's not even really the important part. Just to give you a little bit of it here, there's a page or two worth of information that's attached to the top of it that kind of breaks it down. I'll just kind of read you from some of the highlights. So the summary is, the Russian regime has been cultivating, supporting, and assisting Trump for at least 5 years. Aim endorsed by Putin has been to encourage splits and divisions in the Western alliance. When you're reading or when you're hearing that, consider that we're talking about this in the background of our own intelligence agencies have already confirmed that the Russians have been involved in hacking. Donald Trump has waffled this way and that on the issue. In his ridiculous press conference last week, he first admitted that it was Russia and then later on once again speculated it could be Chinese or the 400-pound man in his bedroom. The dossier goes on to say, so far Trump has declined various sweetener real estate business deals offered to him in Russia in order to further the Kremlin's cultivation of him. However, he and his inner circle have accepted a regular flow of intelligence from the Kremlin, including on his Democratic and other political rivals. Just to stop right there. If this turns out to be true, Donald Trump will and must be impeached. If this information is confirmed, it's over. That is illegal. It's a felony. There is a BBC report. It also sort of outlines the seriousness of this. I'll just read you this whole little section of it. This is from an article titled, Trump Compromising Claims, How and Why Did We Get Here, from the BBC on January 12th. And it has an interesting little exchange from the author. On the 15th of October, the U.S. Secret Intelligence Court issued a warrant to investigate 2 Russian banks. This news was given to me by several sources and corroborated by someone I will identify only as a senior member of the U.S. intelligence community. This is the BBC reporter. He would never volunteer anything. Giving up classified information would be illegal, but he would confirm or deny what I had heard from other sources. Quote, I'm going to write a story that says, end quote, I would say, I don't have a problem with that, he would reply. If my information was accurate, he confirmed the sequence of events below. Last April, the CIA director was shown intelligence that worried him. It was, allegedly, a tape recording of a conversation about money from the Kremlin going into the U.S. presidential campaign. It was passed to the U.S. by an intelligence agency of one of the Baltic states. The CIA cannot act domestically against American citizens, so a joint counterintelligence task force was created. The task force included 6 agencies or departments of government. Dealing with the domestic, U.S. side of the inquiry were the FBI, the Department of the Treasury, and the Department of Justice. For the foreign and intelligence aspects of the investigation, there were another 3 agencies: the CIA, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and the National Security Agency, responsible responsible for electronic spying. Lawyers from the National Security Division of the DOJ then threw up an application. They took it to the secret U.S. court that deals with intelligence, the FISA court, named after the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. They wanted permission to intercept the electronic records from 2 Russian banks. Their first application in June was rejected outright by the judge. They returned with a more narrowly drawn order in July and were rejected again. Finally, before a new judge, the order was granted on the 15th of October, 3 weeks before Election Day. Neither Mr. Trump nor his associates are named in the FISA order, which would only cover foreign citizens or foreign entities, in this case the Russian banks. But ultimately, the investigation is looking for transfers of money from Russia to the United States, each one, if proved, a felony offense. So, just to kind of give you the whole picture here, ladies and gentlemen, we have more than passing suspicion that Donald Trump and his team, his campaign, may have deliberately colluded with the Russians and accepted intelligence and worked with them throughout the campaign, which is illegal. This should be the shadow hanging over his entire presidency, and we absolutely have to have investigations into this and get to the bottom of what actually happened.
This should have been one of those 24/7 news stories that just doesn't go away. This should have been treated with no less seriousness, and I would argue far more seriousness, than all of the bullshit about Benghazi, all of the bullshit about the Clinton Foundation, all of the bullshit about the goddamn emails.
Fucking emails.
That wouldn't go away. After numerous investigations, constant evidence indicating no wrongdoing, and yet we haven't heard squat about this dossier leading up into the inauguration, beyond the initial announcement and a whole bunch of golden showers jokes.
Now, to be fair, because for some reason we on the left feel that we need to do that, when our foes on the right do not, Benghazi, emails. The dossier was originally published by BuzzFeed, but it was passed on by basically every other major journalistic enterprise in the country. So when the next time you hear Donald Trump braying about the rigged media, remember that they all passed on publishing this dossier. CNN subsequently did a report after BuzzFeed dropped the whole unverified document that was based not on the document but on its own sources. There was a painful exchange between Kellyanne Conway, Trump's propaganda minister, and Anderson Cooper. It went on for like 20 minutes where Kellyanne Conway and the Trump team were trying to accuse CNN of somehow being the ones to leak this. They weren't. The media has been nothing if not completely professional in their handling of what appears to be the largest scandal in American history. This would make Watergate look like a little plunking turd compared to the shit show that's going to start if even a modicum of this ends up to have any basis in reality whatsoever.
Any one element featured in this dossier is enough to disqualify Trump immediately. But for any quantity of it to be true, not only does it obviously negate his position as president, but Jesus Christ, how fucking stupid do you look as a Trump supporter? I don't know how else to say this. There was suspicion before this that he was colluding with the Russians. Didn't you mention October 15th as one of the dates for this information being passed initially?
This dossier has been circulating for at least 6 months within political and diplomatic circles. This information has been known by heavy hitters for a long time.
And yet, we just hear about it after he's elected, and then it goes away.
The thing about this dossier is, it led to a bunch of pretty funny jokes on Twitter, because one of the things contained in it is basically the Russians contrived to get what's called a kompromat, some dirt on Donald Trump. Again, Russia is kind of a mafia state. This is kind of their thing. This is what they do. They try and get some embarrassing information on various powerful and political people so that they can later on down the road manipulate them. The jokes stem from supposedly Trump had some kind of a sex thing going on where girls were peeing on a bed, or he was peeing on them, or they were peeing on him. Luann and I are sex positive. We don't really give a fuck about that. It's kind of funny, and we're going to make plenty of jokes about it. But that is actually the least damaging piece of information in the entire fucking thing. The damaging parts of information is where Trump apparently, he has for months and months gone out of his way to defend Russia and Vladimir Putin at every turn. He has praised Vladimir Putin at every opportunity. While he's running down John Lewis and civil rights leaders on Martin Luther King Day, he's turning around and trumpeting the praises of a Russian gangster. So just take this all in your mind, Mr. Trump voter. And I want you to imagine that it is Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton in the place of Trump, that an MI6 agent has put together a 30-page report based on his own sources, which are long established because of his lengthy career in Russian politics and in spying in Russia. You're telling me that it's just that it's fan fiction? That it's fantasy? That there's nothing there? That there's no reason to investigate?
Especially when, let's be honest, you're willing to believe some seriously Alex Jones shit. I mean, the whole Pizzagate thing, really? The whole Hillary Clinton running a sex dungeon under pizza places? That seems perfectly reasonable to you? But the fact that a multinational businessman has ties to a foreign power, that's sort of weird to you? That's unlikely? That's fake news? Seriously.
And Donald Trump, it has been rumored forever that he has various financial connections to the Russian oligarchs, which, understanding Russia is essentially run by a handful of oligarchs, Vladimir Putin being the chief among them. But he and they, the oligarchs, his pals that all live in Moscow, they run the show. It has been long rumored that Trump has connections to these people. But the one thing that we don't have to verify it, anyone, his tax returns, the ones he refuses to release. Why does he refuse to release them? He's so proud of his businesses. He's doing very well. He says he's under a minor audit, which that doesn't actually disqualify you from releasing anything. That's just a nonsense excuse. It's possible. In fact, I'd say it's more than possible. It's likely, if not suspiciously probable, that he has connections to these guys that go deeper than we even know. So all of this information all kind of fits together in a way that's not even really conspiratorial.
Trump, in addition to failing to produce his tax returns, has also failed to divest himself of his business interests. So even if we clear everything he's done before this point, he still has business relationships with foreign powers. He still has the ability to receive money from foreign powers. He still has the ability to be influenced by foreign powers. Even if this dossier comes to nothing, we still will always have doubt as to why he's making decisions when it comes to foreign powers.
Even just, his own business interests here in the United States, locally. But to take a step back, when you're asking yourself, well, how seriously should I take this dossier? Because, if you're just a Joe Blow on the street and, you haven't really read up on the issue, it's completely understandable to be skeptical. These are some pretty wild allegations. It's like something out of a spy novel. But think about this. The heads of all of the intelligence agencies got together and felt that it was necessary to brief the president. Do you know how hard it is to get anything up the chain of command that the president and the president-elect will personally have to see? Now, look, it's possible that the CIA and the FBI and the NSA, that they thought, we know that these allegations are out there, so we're just going to let the bosses know so that they're not blindsided by it. There is a possibility that that's the only explanation. But for some reason, I doubt it, because they have dubbed this source as credible. They believe that Christopher Steele is a credible source of information, which means at the very least they are duty-bound to run down every line of this document.
The fact that Steele is a credible source is sufficient justification to run down any leads generated by this dossier. If it's manufactured, they'll come to nothing. If it's not manufactured, it means you guys fucking elected a Russian puppet. I don't know how else to say it. You did.
I think if you were just sort of watching some of the media figures as they were reacting to the incoming news as the news was breaking, I think it's going to be difficult for us to even fully comprehend what it would mean if it's true. A shit show, a clusterfuck, these words, they almost seem sort of paltry in comparison to the fucking awful that would be unleashed on the country, on our political discourse, because Trump Nazis, what are they going to do? People have a certain tendency to, even when they're met with adverse information, to just double down and double down. But with this, there's no more doubling down. There's no sticking your head in the sand. You either love the country or you don't. You either support Russia or you support the United States. There's no middle way here if the information contained within this dossier is even sort of accurate.
At its simplest, we're talking about removing Trump from the presidency.
And possibly going to jail.
But if that happens, you have to consider the harm that comes to our electoral process as a result. What it says is, the people of this nation cannot be trusted to make a rational decision when it comes to who will lead their country. This dossier, the specifics of it may have come as a surprise, but the type of things it reveals about Trump, there's no surprise. This is the same guy we told you he was before this. This is the same guy who said the same awful shit that you decided meant he was being honest. He was just telling it like it is. Except he wasn't. He was telling you the stupid shit you wanted to hear to elect him. Because what he was really doing was pretty much the opposite of making America great.
Another thing that in America we never even consider, we don't even think about because we're just so selfish and absorbed in our own bullshit, is foreign governments, enemies of the state, communist dictatorships, the Chinese government, ISIS, you name it, all of these people are already using Donald Trump's election as a way to try and persuade their own people. See, they got Donald Trump, so democracy is a total fucking waste of time. They use this stuff as arguments. Can you even imagine what it's going to be like in places that are trying to fight for democracy if we find out that the United States, the cradle of modern democracy, ended up electing a Russian puppet? The aftershocks of this event could be incredible in and of themselves.
What's basically happened is we have abdicated our moral authority when it comes to democracy. We have abdicated any credibility we had as the cradle of democracy. We have abdicated any credibility we had, really at all. Any credibility we had as a nation in the way we operate.
It's already bad enough as we're approaching his inauguration. If it turns out that he was in fact compromised by the Russians, it's just that much worse. And I want the Trump voters listening to know that you are responsible for all of it if this turns out to be true.
How stupid are the people of Iowa?
To bring this back to something a bit more local, the New York Times recently did an article wherein a reporter who was in Monticello, Iowa during the Clinton campaign returned post-election to sort of see how the population felt about how things were going. And for those of you who are familiar with small towns, you have diners that tend to have the groups where the old guys get together in the morning, have coffee, and bitch about politics. Monticello is no different. And so the writer of this article, Trip Gabriel, interacted with both the Democrat and Republican groups that meet there and do that. And one of the things I found sort of interesting when I was reading through his article was a quote from one of the residents of Iowa, Mr. Emailing, to quote, "The way it is nowadays, unless I see proof positive, it's all a lie," unquote. Now, he was referring to the dossier that we just mentioned. He further added, according to the article, that he was, quote, "more concerned that government officials might have leaked the material to the news media." To quote him specifically, "I don't know if it was classified, but if it was, whoever leaked it needs to go to jail. We need law and order back in this country," unquote. Now, this guy is more concerned about jailing the person who might have leaked that information than he is about what the contents of that dossier say about the guy he fucking elected. Now, if that isn't a reminder that people who vote Republican vote against their own interests, I'd like to quote another of the residents of Monticello. Mel Modernock, a retired farmer mentioned in the article, is quoted as saying, "Trump was against TPP, which would help exports of ag commodities." He then further goes on to say that they, meaning the residents of the town who voted for Trump, voted against their own self-interests. Again, this is a popular theme, especially when you're dealing with the Midwest and Republicans. The part that bothered me the most about this article is the paragraph that begins, quote, "Many were hazy on specific policy details about how, say, House Republicans were seeking to replace Medicare with a voucher system. These voters feared an outbreak of European-style terrorist attacks by Muslims in the United States, maybe in their own communities. And overwhelmingly, Trump supporters did not want their hard-earned money redistributed to people they regarded as undeserving." And I think that is the most important piece out of that. Aside from fear, it is the element of not wanting your hard-earned money to go to somebody you don't think deserves it.
There's a very high chance in a small town they're church-going Christians, or at least they call themselves that. But their final analysis of politics, the main thing they're worried about, Muslims and poor people getting their money.
One of the others that I didn't mention before, one of the few women mentioned in this that it's quoted directly, is a woman who's a 46-year-old who earns a base wage of $6.50 an hour working at this diner. Quote, "I think they should be drug testing if they're on welfare," end quote. And the person to whom she was speaking, another local resident, said, quote, "The welfare system needs to be reorganized," end quote, because she's concerned that Chicago people, her words, were moving to Burlington to receive higher benefits and bringing crime. And Obama, quote, purposely got into the presidency so he could ruin America, end quote. He purposely got into the presidency so he could ruin America.
Well, that's what Rush Limbaugh said. This isn't like a private opinion that's just held by small-town cranks. What you're witnessing here is what happens when people feast on right-wing talk radio for their entire lives and then are asked to give a cogent, coherent political opinion.
Let's be honest. Anyone who tells you that we should be drug testing for welfare, well, one, they don't know, apparently, that doesn't really produce any usable results and cuts virtually no one from welfare. And two, they want to essentially criminalize welfare. The presumption is that if you're on welfare, you're doing something criminal. You morally deserve to be suffering. And when she says Chicago people are moving to Burlington to receive higher benefits and bringing crime, who do you think she means? There is this presumption that middle America is the real America, and that somehow all these elitists on the coasts are ruining everything. Because the elitists don't have the common sense that hardworking people in the Midwest do. Well, here's what the common sense these people exhibit say. There are people, and they probably have brown skin, who are ruining their state, who don't deserve welfare, should be treated as if they're criminals for it, and are hazy about the actual policies that affect them.
If there's one thing that you must take away from this article is that the common sense of the so-called real America, it doesn't involve anything specific. It's kind of like Trump. They just have a bunch of opinions that they believe strongly, but which they can't verify or even really expound upon in any specific way. It's just an instinct. It's more of an emotional thing. It's a feeling that they have about the world, not a thought that they have, not a sense that they have in like the common sense. They have a feeling sense that the world is this way, and they really don't care about what the facts are.
They have anecdote about that person.
Anecdote and aphorism.
And yet, we're supposed to be cautious about this dossier. The specific quote was, "The way it is nowadays, unless I see positive proof, it's all a lie," end quote. Which means pretty much everything they were talking about, using those qualifications, is a lie. The Chicago people aren't coming. They aren't getting benefits. This is the factual double standard that we have to deal with, particularly when dealing with the right. I want to give these people the benefit of a doubt. And I know it sounds condescending, but I think they just don't know any better. I think that these are people who've relied on what they think they see going on around them. And I suspect a diet of right-wing media telling them that these are the way things are.
Guys, the reason we do research in the world is because common sense is not sufficient. Because the mind is easily fooled by all sorts of things, starting with deliberate lies spread by right-wing media. So if you don't actually have the common sense to use different sources, to check around, to nose around, to root through facts, to check out not only what your friends say, but what your enemies say, the odds of you ever landing on an informed opinion are minute. And if you do land on an informed opinion, it's by accident.
To reiterate, I think one of the most telling lines in this article, and I think this will help bring it back around to AJ's opening broadside. Quote, "Overwhelmingly, Trump supporters did not want their hard-earned money redistributed to people they regarded as undeserving." End quote. I think that is the root of most of what's going on here, particularly when it comes to the ACA, or as it's popularly been called, Obamacare, apparently to the confusion of some people who don't realize they are, in fact, the same thing.
Well, just picking up on that for a second, there was a guy on Facebook who said something to the effect of, like, oh, I don't really care if they repeal Obamacare because I have the Affordable Care Act. Well, guess what, schmucko? They're the same fucking thing. And so if your common sense is telling you, oh, it's okay if they repeal the Affordable Care Act or if they repeal Obamacare, guess who's going to be without health insurance? Let's talk about common sense with health care. Common sense would dictate that having a pre-existing condition should not preclude you from getting health coverage or health care that you can afford. But if they repeal the ACA, guess what? We're right back to that situation because the ACA/Obamacare, it did a few primary things. You could not have lifetime caps on coverage, could not deny someone for a pre-existing condition. But if we repeal this and we go to a voucher system, Well, here's what common sense tells you about a voucher system. It's going to end up putting costs back on you, because that's how Republicans always design their policies. They figure out ways to make you pay more than the government pays, and they raise your costs while they hand out tax cuts to people who forget not deserve it. They don't even need it.
Because here's the thing. As AJ pointed out, this all comes back to money. But we're talking about healthcare. Making the decision based on money. One of the things that the ACA/Obamacare did was take, to some degree, money out of the decision making. One of the unfortunate side effects was that it was still essentially administered by private companies, and so they still had some control over how things were managed. It wasn't the single payer system. We didn't even have that option that we kind of hoped we were going to have. That sort of went away. But having run it through private companies means that money still ultimately is the deciding factor in healthcare. The ACA did what it could with that, but at the end of the day, money is what determines healthcare. And for me, that's not common sense. Health needs should dictate health care. We were barely able to get that with the ACA, because by the time it finally made it through all the hurdles it had to go through, it was fairly toothless. We did get a few things that we really needed, the pre-existing condition being one of the biggest.
But we walked away without a public option. To me, that was something that Hillary Clinton / Bernie Sanders, if she had won, she and Bernie and Chuck Schumer would have probably been working pretty hard on trying to figure out a way to still put a public option in the healthcare system, which would mean that the government would be competing with the private companies, offering more competition, not less.
And let's not forget, Hillary has been working for healthcare since she was the first lady. This has been an ongoing mission for her. And it's not because she wants to ruin the country.
Do you suppose the folks who are hazy on policy details at the table of knowledge in Monticello, Iowa know that? Do you suppose they care? Do you suppose they had any of the same common sense reservations when they were talking about the email scandal day after day or the Benghazi bullshit day after day? This double standard is just fucking crazy.
Do you think any of the people railing against Obamacare realize that it's essentially a Republican plan? It's one that's existed in some form or another since the Nixon era, that it's inspired to some degree by Romney Care, that the Republican former candidate for president used in his own state. The problem the right has with Obamacare is not that it doesn't work. The problem is that it kind of does. It works more often than it's not, and that damn Obama is going to get credit, and that can't happen. It doesn't matter what happens to you. It doesn't matter to them if you go bankrupt because of a medical condition. It doesn't matter to them that if they repeal Obamacare without having their own alternate policy, that you're going to suffer.
A new analysis shows that about 18 million people could lose their health insurance in the first year if Congress repeals the Affordable Care Act without a replacement. That's from the Washington Post. The fact that they would even consider doing this, that this would even be on the table, it's incredible. And what's even more incredible is how many right-wing people are going to turn around and act surprised if their health insurance is stripped. Well, guess what? Mr. Common Sense, Mr. Table of Knowledge, you voted for these people. You voted for these policies.
Knowing that's what they wanted to do.
And if you didn't know, that's your fault. It's not our fault if you don't do your research and then you end up voting against your own interests. And we're not going to sit here and pretend that you're going to be able to, stand up and blame liberals or somehow push off the responsibility on somebody else. This is your mess. This is your unified Republican government. Like we said before, you have all the keys to all the doors. What happens now is completely up to you. Speaking personally, I am actually hoping that Donald Trump, Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, and all these people who I firmly oppose, I hope that they get together and come up with a fantastic healthcare plan. They can repeal Obamacare. I don't give a shit if they repeal Obamacare, if they replace it with a single-payer system. If we get Canada's healthcare system or Medicare for all or some sort of fix to the Obamacare system that makes it cheaper and more affordable, that opens up national competition, whatever they're going to do, it's fine by me. I will be happy to give them the credit for it if it in fact happens. That's the side that I'm on. I'm on your side, Trump voter. Ultimately, I want you to have health care coverage because I, like Bernie Sanders and like the rest of the progressive left, I believe that health care is your right. You have a right to medical care if your life is in danger. Damn the costs. Damn the tax breaks for the millionaires. Damn the cuts to the corporate tax rates. Your life comes first. Your children's lives come first. Your family's lives come first. And then we worry about the money.
Because there are, as AJ pointed out, as many as 18 million people who are going to lose their coverage in the first year. Now, I don't know 18 million people personally, but what happens to them does matter to me. I have no stake in their lives. Full disclosure, I don't even have any stake in Obamacare. I work for a company that provides my health insurance. I pay some into it, but they provide my health insurance. And my union negotiates my coverage. I'm pretty well taken care of. I was doing all right before Obamacare. I'll be doing all right after Obamacare, as long as I have that job.
Right. That's the thing. If the actual elements of the insurance exchanges state by state, if that all goes away, suddenly you are now once again tethered to your job for your health insurance. That is another way to give corporations and other entities power over you without any recourse, because the health insurance pre-2008 for people with pre-existing conditions was insane, unaffordable, ridiculous.
And here's the other part of the disclosure. This is why it is important to me. I was literally born with a pre-existing condition. The only reason I was ever able to have insurance was because I had it through my parents when I was a kid, and I got it through my employers over the course of my adult life. Not everybody has that option. Most people don't have that option, which means their choices are go without insurance and pay out of pocket when you finally desperately have to go to the doctor, or just fucking suffer and die. 18 million people. Let me remind you that number one more fucking time. 18 million people. Some of them are going to be people you know. Some of them are going to be people you care about. Some of them may even be you.
And this is why it's difficult in this era of politics, is because if you're hearing what we're saying and you're a Trump voter, and that just doesn't register for you, it doesn't matter to you that 18 million people are going to lose their health care coverage. It doesn't matter to you that they're going to be people in your community. And if that doesn't matter to you, that's a you problem. There ain't much that I can do to help you with it. What I'm going to do in the meantime, though, to try and help you despite yourself is the following. I'm going to call my congressman. I'm going to call my senators, and in a very polite way, I'm going to tell them I do not support a complete repeal without a replacement that I've had a chance to examine. None of this middle-of-the-night bullshit like they've started with. We need to actually look at their replacement plan and decide, does this take us in a better direction, or does it take us back to the bankruptcy robber baron insurance companies? Because let me tell you something. If they try and take us back, this is how people take to the streets, is when their lives are threatened directly by politicians. And repealing the Affordable Care Act without a replacement is doing just that. So until next time, organize, mobilize, protest, vote.